So what effect could the new rail network have on the economy? Sky's business and economics correspondent, Poppy Trowbridge, is at the news wall.
Well, the HS2 journey from start to finish will cost £32.7 billion, but hopefully generate £53 billion for the economy along the way and create more than 100,000 jobs in everything from construction to the eventual running of the new stations. But there are concerns that that bill will grow. Now, the current plans will cost about £1,000 per taxpayer. However, projects like this can see costs overrun by 70% on average. And some estimate that the final bill could be closer to £40 billion by the time it's all done. Yet the big hope is that HS2 will help create wealth up and down the country.
You may well encourage some development in Leeds and Manchester, particularly around the station. But on the other hand, it might be that you no longer want to have a regional office in, say, Manchester and Leeds, because you can get to London so easily, so why bother?
But we've got a long time to wait until we know if these figures work out. Construction will start in 2017, the first trains won't run until 2026, and the current government will be long gone by then.
Poppy, thanks. Well, here with me at the Gherkin is Dr. Steve Davies, who's from the think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs. Nice to see you, Steve. Thanks for coming in. Now,
my pleasure.
The IEA fears that this will be a project with a huge cost overrun, but I suppose we could say that about just about any government transport project, and yet we do need transport infrastructure. We've got to start somewhere.
Well, indeed, but the crucial thing really about this project is that private capital won't touch it, which is why the government's having to do it. Unlike, let's say, a third runway at Heathrow, which private capital is prepared to go into because there's a prospect of an economic return. As you said, this is a vanity project, basically.
Economists would say, well, it's a public good. Not all investment has to be justified by profit and loss. Sometimes we invest in the country's infrastructure for wider social issues.
Well, the problem here is that what you will see is the shiny new trains, the new stations and things of that sort. What we won't see is the profitable investments and the jobs that could have been created with that £32 billion had it been used elsewhere. So I think actually on balance the effect of this could be negative. It could actually reduce the total number of jobs and total output in the economy rather than increasing it.
Well, let me read to you what the British Chambers of Commerce is saying. It says, quote, transformative infrastructure projects like HS2 create confidence, jobs and competitiveness. So they're in favour.
Well, I think that they are probably mistaken in that, actually, because, as I say, you can see certain visible effects, but there are the invisible effects of diverting lots of capital investment from more productive areas to areas where it's not very productive. And also, there's an assumption this is going to lead to regional growth. I actually agree with the previous commentator you had. What I think this is more likely to do is to actually suck activity out of places like Manchester, where I live, in fact, and Leeds and other northern cities, down into London.
Why? Simply because London will become even more accessible.
Exactly. And what it will tend to do is raise house prices in affluent parts of Cheshire and city centre of Manchester and Leeds. But what you'll have is people living there but working in London. That's my suspicion.
You see, what the BCC, the British Chambers of Commerce, says is that our rail network is up to capacity and cannot endlessly be patched up.
Well, that may well be true. But in that case, why not spend billions of pounds of public money on upgrading and improving the existing system? Why use it to build a new, and I would argue unnecessary, add-on?
The bit that baffles me, and I'm not sure if you can explain this, is that the whole thing takes so long. I mean, we're talking about it not being fully operational until 2033, 20 years down the line.
Well, that is extraordinary. It's a reflection on the way the British planning system works, I'm afraid, and the enormous number of hoops that you have to jump through in order to get anything through past local opposition.
So, let's look at that bill. What was it? 30-odd billion pounds. Yes. If I pop that in a little box in front of you and said, OK, Dr. Steve, you know all about this. Spend it in a meaningful and productive way on the British economy, in particular on infrastructure. What would you build instead?
Well, I would build things which other people are prepared to invest in, such as airport expansion in the southeast, the third runway for Heathrow, new road space, which, again, people are prepared to invest in because they know there's a return, there's a real demand for it. I would probably use some of it to upgrade some of the existing rail system and make that cheaper and more efficient. OK, on that point, whereabouts? Because, you know, rail is immensely popular. We have more people travelling on the rail today than we've ever had, and it has certain green credentials, if that turns you on.
Where would you spend the money on rail?
Well, you could upgrade, for example, the main West Line to Bristol out of Paddington, which currently is not electrified. You could extend platform length at stations on most of the main trunk lines around the country at the moment, improve cross-country rail routes. All of that would be a much more effective use of money than building a railway line to enable people to get from Manchester to London in half the time they do now.
What evidence do you have that this will suck activity out of the regions and into London? Because the history of transport surely tells you that if you want to be a vibrant, prosperous region, you need transport links.
Well, indeed, but where to? If you really think that building high-speed rail is going to improve regional growth, the thing to do would be to build a high-speed link, say, from Liverpool to Hull, or a really long cross-country link from, say, Newcastle down to Plymouth. One of the useful parts about this probably is the way that you can get from, say, Leeds to Birmingham more quickly. But at the moment, like most of our infrastructure, it's radiating out of London. So the main effect will be simply that people can, in fact, get into London more quickly than they can now. So they're even more likely to work in London rather than in Manchester or Leeds or Birmingham.
And we heard David Cameron there say, look, there's going to be no turning back on this. This is a done deal. This is going to happen. If you were a betting man, what are the odds that it won't happen?
Well, that depends on whether David Cameron has his way or whether the government's creditors have their way. I suspect they won't be too happy about this. The problem is this is the kind of project that politicians love. It's a bit like a really big new expensive sports car. It's shiny, it's glossy, it's very expensive, not much practical use, but it compensates for shortcomings elsewhere.
All right, Steve Davies from the IEA, many thanks.
Thank
Nice
you.
to see you.